The Trump administration, NIH, is slashing funds to all of the alphabet people problems, and the New York Times is very upset. Speaking of the New York Times, they also issued a hit piece on every conservative's most unlikely lovable Senator John Fetterman, and also California infrastructure is crumbling, but I repeat myself, we hit California a lot, but guaranteed it's well-deserved. All that and more coming up on this episode of Turning Point Tonight. My name is Jobob. Thanks so much for tuning in. Together, we are charting the course of America's cultural comeback. This is Turning Point Tonight. Now, before we get to any of those stories and to our fantastic panel, we have to talk about this really interesting initiative out of New York City. Over the weekend, Eric Adams, mayor of New York, announced that the city was going to spend $1.6 million inserting panic buttons into bodegas. Now, it isn't a secret that bodegas have been unfortunately ravaged with crime and burglaries, and therefore have been calling the cops a lot. These panic buttons would apparently, you press it and it goes directly to the NYPD. And that all sounds great. Couple things though. First of all, how are they over $3,000 a piece? I don't know exactly how that works, but that price seems high, especially if you divide that by the 1.6 million. But that's not the big problem. The big problem that I have with this is while it is a step in the right direction, what happens when nobody gets prosecuted? For those of you who aren't familiar, and I can't imagine there's a lot of you that aren't, New York City is home to the Manhattan District Attorney named Alvin Bragg. And if you're not familiar with Alvin Bragg's work, he's the one that brought all the bunch of nonsense crap about President Trump and also doesn't prosecute crime. He's the guy that has said, well, petty theft is a crime of poverty, and prosecuting these poor individuals doesn't make anyone safer. In other words, the panic buttons, while I believe could be a good idea, don't make a difference if you don't freaking prosecute anyone. Arrests can go up, but if they're not charged with crimes because the woke DA doesn't think that people who are just committing petty theft out of crimes of poverty need to be charged, then none of it matters. In other words, New York libs, you're almost there, but not quite. Here to comment on that and so much more is Chef Andrew Gruel. He's now city council member in Huntington Beach, and our favorite Alex Stein, comedian, podcast host, provocateur, among many other things. Guys, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Andrew, I want to start with you here because you live in a state that is run by crazy people who often have these ideas of this is going to help this, and it never ends up working. Do you think that there's a push, now that there is a push to at the very least get these buttons installed in bodegas because people want to see the crime stop, do you think there will be a push to actually charge criminals in the city of New York as well as blue places around the country?
No, not at all. The reality is this is just another way in which they're saying, look, we're taking this problem seriously, but they're not. I'd like to know who's providing all of those panic buttons. Probably a friend of the person who wrote the policy. I mean, the other thing is that I still don't understand what they're going to do when we always avoid the most obvious solution to the problem, which is actually putting these people in jail. What I would suggest is that if you're going to have these panic buttons, or you're going to end up giving each bodega owner, $3,000, like have a button that just blasts out some crazy music or like XXX rated, noise in the background, something to distract them. How are these panic buttons going to distract them from actually stealing products, stabbing people, the basic resume of kind of what they do?
Yeah, no, that's actually a pretty good point. The only problem is I would imagine that the people robbing the store might like the loud blasting music because they seem to be the ones who are blasting it in their apartments, keeping everybody awake anyways. Alex, so Andrew and I unfortunately live in the godforsaken hellhole that is California. You, on the other hand, live in a state that I think actually prosecutes crime. Do you notice a difference anywhere when you travel to these deep blue states in contrast to where you live?
Well, I'm in Dallas, and believe it or not, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, they're all pretty blue. So, we still have our fair share of illegal immigrants and crazy crime. But when it comes to these buttons, unless this button, fires a gun back at the criminal, unless you press a button and it, shoots a bullet at somebody, it's not going to help because the NYPD, it's a bunch of overweight women that you see some of these NYPD women. I mean, it's just a bunch of DEI women, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to women, but like the NYPD NYPD is a joke. And I talked to people that were, a part of this, that are retired, that are now in, legal, some of them are ex-NYPD, now they're attorneys. And they talk about how the NYPD has gone downhill. So you can press a button all you want. I don't really think you're going to have a great response time. And I think when they do respond, they're going to be too afraid to do anything, because that Alvin Bragg, when these people get arrested, they have bail reform. They get let out of jail. So it's not even worth this NYPD's time to do the paperwork to arrest these criminals when they know they're just going to be on the street, instantly.
Yeah, it sounds like, again, without disparaging the good cops at the NYPD, it might be filled with a bunch of big booty Latinas, dare I say. I don't know if that's a phrase that you've heard before, but potentially. Speaking of... This is a terrible transition. I was going to transition to big booty Latinas getting surgically ingested. Speaking of other medical health problems, the Trump administration, the NIH is pulling funding, or at least expected to pull hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for what they call unscientific, unreality-based studies. Most of these LGBTQ2 alphabet letters of all sorts. Specifically targeting stuff for changing genders in adolescence. Everybody thinks that this is probably reasonable, but libs are freaking out. The New York Times had a big, long piece basically telling everyone to panic. Andrew, is the panic justified in this? It feels like, hey, there's a bunch of studies operating on premises that aren't even based in reality, and Trump's like, no, we shouldn't do that. Is this a justifiable position to take politically, you think?
Well, let's call this what this is. So he's taking away money for gender reassignment surgery, whether it's a study that leads to that. But I look at all of this within the construct of this is just studies related to mental illness. So if we take the 800 million or the amount of money that he's removing and we actually just apply it to studying mental illness, we can still say that it falls under the umbrella of LGBTQ+9. So look, it's a win-win for everybody. We just got to put the money in a category in which we understand what is driving this mental illness, and say we're moving the money from gender reassignment surgery to actually fixing the problem that, or with all of the issues that they're having, we can combine two problems into one. We can take the people that are freaking out about this and we can place 2 or 3 of them, because there's probably only like 600 people anyways, across each 300 of these bodegas. And just by virtue of their presence, crime will go down in those stores.
Yeah, I don't hate that. That's not the worst idea I've ever heard. Alex, you get a lot of heat, especially online, from the LGBT. Andrew, you did a very good job at pronouncing all those letters, by the way. I can never get it right in my head. The alphabet people, as they're affectionately called. Are they going to continue panicking after this? What do you think the reaction online, or even in serious forums, is going to be from Trump pulling this funding?
Well, Jobob, I get accused of being anti-LGBTQ all the time, and people call me a xenophobe. But, the idea that I could be anti-LGBTQ is impossible, considering I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. I've been a Dallas Cowboys fan my whole life. And so there's no bigger amount of gay pride that I could have, than that. So for the LGBTQ mafia to come after me, it just shows you that they don't really know the real Alex. So, honestly, if you really ask me, when it comes to all this trans stuff, there was a medical application a long time ago, and I do a lot of these debates. There are very few amount of people that are born intersex, and when that is the case, in that instance, you do want to affirm their gender at a young age. But we don't really need many studies. Unless that's the case, if you're under 18 and you're not born intersex, it should be illegal. They don't even need to do studies. They should be like studying cocaine or studying murder. I mean, it's just saying we don't need to do a study. We already know that if you're under 18 and you're cutting off your genitals, you're making a lifelong decision that you're going to regret for the rest of your life. So I don't even need these studies. It's a waste of time, in my opinion.
Yeah, which is probably exactly the reason why the president is pulling the funding for that. Speaking of all of the trans folks, Andrew, we talked a little bit about this before we got on the air here. So you're a city council member. You've got a bunch of these blue-haired people coming to all of your meetings and getting arrested if they do anything outside of the bounds of legality. Can you kind of speak to the whole what'd you call it, Alex? The LGBT mafia? That feels like a pretty good term for it. What's that like?
I think that's what they call it. The LGBTQ mafia is one of their adjectives.
Yeah,
Councilman Gruel, what's that like?
What it comes down to is that this is a small minority, right?
Mm-hmm.
0.0001% of any population. And it's minority rule, which is really goes all the way back to the Bolsheviks, is that if you can kind of put all that focus on minority rule, then you can uproot the foundation upon which society is built and unmoor people from society. And then all of the, kind of those mindless people, it's that mass formation psychosis that they used to talk about. They follow that minority, which then becomes the majority. So what they want to do is they want to attach their agenda to every single issue, no matter how large and small. And if they can't do so, well, then they create issues. We're dealing with it here with the libraries in Huntington Beach, where there are all these crazy books in the libraries. We removed them. Then it turned into you're banning books. This went on for years. Fast forward, now it's actually a measure, a special election that we're having in 3 or 4 weeks about whether certain books can be in the library, and then subsequently whether we can privatize services in the library. So that's become a crusade piece for these groups that then lump all of the kind of average spectators into this conversation. And it always blows up in these city council meetings. I know I have a friend of mine actually who, as a joke, he goes to city council meetings and he's kind of a parody of this, and he makes these huge scenes, which I've been watching him for years. And then when I got on city council and I saw that he was mocking people that really exist, it all tied together. Great guy. You should meet him, Alex Stein.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Chef. Thank you so much. The city councilman to chef pipeline, though, that has, real quick, sorry, Jobob, I have to interject. Is that a very rare pipeline? Are you the first to do that? I mean, even Super Chef Bobby Flay has never been a city councilman. Gordon Ramsay, never been a city councilman. I mean, Chef, you are in, rare company, my friend.
I hold the power to touch something that everybody consumes, and they do so in a happy manner. So food is the great unifier. You can consider me to some degree, I was going to say, I don't want to get myself canceled, but just consider me, really the arbiter of truth here through food, and now city council.
the arbiter of truth through food, and also the what did you call? You used some better words than I'm going to use. The city council provocateur extraordinaire will be back after the break to discuss the New York Times hit piece against every conservative's surprisingly favorite Senator John Fetterman, and so much more coming up after the break. Don't go away. We'll be right back.